That extract from Douglas Wright's work, Forever. And Douglas Wright joins me now. Welcome. That work, Forever, and another recent work of yours, Buried Venus, is in part about relationships between people, men and women in different formations. What interests you in dance to explore these relationships?
Well, I think that dance often is about abstract relationships between people. Dance is often viewed as an abstract form, and I often find it boring myself to go to the theatre and watch pure dance. So I've been involved in the last few years in looking at relationships, human relationships, to try and understand how people relate to each other and to find out why we relate to each other in the ways that we do, and to be able to perhaps laugh a little bit and cry a little bit at, just to show ourselves. Yeah.
It's interesting because sometimes writers will say that in the creative process of writing, they find out things that they didn't know before they actually started the discipline of putting words on the page. Do you find that when you're choreographing? Do you find things about relationships between people start making sense while you're choreographing?
Yeah, I think it can be very humbling actually to watch people reveal things about themselves. I do discover every time how endlessly fascinating people are, the dancers in my company, how everybody has experience. It is incredibly rich and powerful if you just take time to ask and listen to people.
So when you're choreographing something like these walks particularly, which are very intense and often quite intimate, do you draw on the experience of the individual dancers as a choreographer?
Yeah, I will ask the dancers questions about their lives, and I will answer the question as well. I very rarely take experience and transpose it to the stage, but we'll use our own experiences to fuel improvisation, so we're kind of primed up or put into the mood of the theme that we're exploring that day or the question we're exploring.
So you're not necessarily acting out in a narrative sort of way, things that people have talked about?
No, I will create an improvisation based around a theme of maybe, say, one person wants the other one sexually, but that person wants that one as a friend and not as a lover and isn't aware of that. So there's a misunderstanding there, and we will, before we do that improvisation, we'll discuss, have you ever had a really good friend that you suddenly felt attracted to? So it's a more general thing. I won't, but it's very powerful to touch on those experiences.
One of the aspects for which your choreography is now known is for its sexual explicitness. How far do you deliberately push the boundaries in that respect in your choreography?
I never really think about that. I mean, to me, it's just implicit in human relationships. So it's never a question for me about pushing any kind of boundaries. It's just really, this is how people relate. This is part of human relationships. So are we going to leave it out? The question does arise when you televise works, because it seems that the powers that be are far happier to show various ways of people killing each other than wanting to make love to each other, which I think is quite obscene, actually. So, to me, I find that very strange. Yeah.
Can you accept that some of the work is going to be offensive to some people?
I think that people who will not accept the fact that perhaps they might have these longings that they find abhorrent in other people, I think that sometimes people, they have to push something away that they haven't accepted perhaps in themselves. So I think for that reason, we have a lot of people running around terrified of their own bodies, so they don't want to see anybody else using the human body as a means of expressing all forms of relating. And I think the human body is obviously a battleground, with sort of the lines are drawn for ownership and who owns your body, what you can do with it.
How far does the fact that you're a homosexual, do you think, help you to be more bold, perhaps, because you've had to consider and confront your sexuality a lot more in our society than heterosexuals do?
Well, I think you kind of have just said it, really. I think that some people in our society have been lucky enough to be tortured since they were children, including women and people of colour and gay people, although that word is kind of becoming extinct or something. Gay, I think it's not. Anyway, people like that have had to we've had to construct our own identity because we weren't given anything to mirror ourselves when we were growing up. And I think we were incredibly fortunate to have to do that, difficult as it was. And that people who have grown up seeing images of their own sexuality mirrored back to them in really glowing terms have never really had to look at themselves and say, well, who am I? So I'm grateful in a way to have been part of a despised minority. Yeah, it's been quite helpful.
You also, though, obviously explore heterosexual relationships in your dance. How far do you find that difficult in terms of taking a woman's point of view, for example? Are you dependent on the women dancers that you work with for that?
Well, you said as a homosexual. Well, I'm not only that. I have had relationships with women, and I think that I have a feminine side of me that I do fully accept. And I never really make work from a woman's point of view. I'm not a woman, but I do talk to the women in my company, and hopefully I listen to what they say and try and understand a little bit of their experience and their strangeness.
What impact do you want your work to have on audiences? What do you want audiences to take away from a Douglas Wright dance?
Well, I never really think about that specifically, but I probably to feel a little bit more awake, maybe, that it would provoke some kind of thought and feeling, deep some kind of response, I suppose.
You want discomfort, do you think? Does that require some discomfort, perhaps?
Well, I think, sometimes moving in the way you think about things does. Growth can be, slightly difficult, or changing or looking at something from a slightly different angle can make you feel a little bit uncomfortable. So, but I don't want to make people uncomfortable.
It's not something you set out to do. No. After the break, we're going to see your work, Elegy, which you made for 3 of your friends who died of AIDS. What interests me about this work is how it is for you when you perform it. How do you feel when you dance this dance?
You're asking me now? Well, I've actually only performed it a handful of times. I performed it on the Opera House stage in Arts Aid, and I can't remember, I think it was 92, to a full house, and it was as if, I think when I made the work, it was like a dam bursting in a way. I had so much grief about my friends that had died, and I'd been away when each of them had died, and they were either overseas or I was here and they were there. So I hadn't been able to go to any of their funerals or anything, and suddenly I I just had to make it work express with my body how I felt about their deaths. And when I performed at that on the Opera House stage, I felt like that I was able to just speak to everybody about the loss and the incredible beauty there is in the moment that passes, the fact that things disappear, they're disappearing all the time. And I think that's what dance is about the moment that is disappearing, and as it disappears, you are going into the next moment. And I think that death has something to teach us in that way about, allowing something to die, I think. So it was very powerful for me to be able to discover that as I was performing to these 1,400 people, or however many there were. It was quite, to use that word, special for me.
I look forward to seeing it again after the break. Thank you for joining us today.